Secrets of the Bible Code Revealed Part 1, we met three world-renowned scientists, Dr. Eliyahu Rips, Doran Whitsom, and Yoav Rosenberg. These men, working as a team over a period of 4 years, devised a scientific model for determining whether or not equidistance letter sequence codes were encrypted into the text of the Torah or the Old Testament. The results electrified the religious world and shocked the scientific community. It appeared the codes were real, but could the code researchers defend their findings before their scientific peers?
The first experiment was a comprehensive experiment, encompassing a large body of words and expressions that have a connection, like names and nicknames of the great sages and rabbis of Israel, as listed in the encyclopedia along with their dates of birth and dates of death. We measured if indeed there was a tendency for such connections, and the result was that there were connections, and the possibility that this occurred by accident was very minimal.
Harold Gans, at the time a senior cryptologist at the National Security Agency in Maryland, heard of the test and the results.
I reproduced the experiment, and lo and behold, I got precisely the results that they had reported. I then went ahead and did a new experiment. Instead of pairing each of the rabbis' names and appellations with their dates of birth and death, I paired them with the places of birth and death, cities, towns, villages, wherever it was they died or were born. And the results I got were even more significant than the original experiment done by Whitsom and Rips. At that point, I knew beyond any shadow of a doubt that the code was real. I felt a chill go up my spine.
Encouraged by the results, the study was sent to the prestigious American mathematics journal Statistical Science for peer review and possible publication. Indeed, nothing is published in statistical science until it's been thoroughly reviewed by at least one independent referee, and on occasion two. In this instance, the documentation was submitted to 3 separate referees. Following its publication, a statement was issued by 5 mathematical scholars, 2 from Harvard University, 1 from Yale University, and 2 from Hebrew University, supporting the findings. Robert Koss, the editor of Statistical Science Journal and a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, is quoted as saying, "Our referees were baffled. Their prior beliefs made them think that the book of Genesis could not possibly contain meaningful references to modern-day individuals. Yet when the authors carried out additional checks, the effect persisted. The paper is thus offered to statistical science readers as a challenging puzzle."
All my instincts as a scientist and also as a Jew spoke against the possibility of such a phenomenon. Yet despite this, the work of Whitsom, Rips, and Rosenberg presents a very strong scientific evidence that under intense scientific experimentation, the phenomenon is shown to exist.
I went to meet with mathematicians at Harvard, at Yale, at Hebrew University. And they knew Dr. Rips and they knew about his work, and they all told me the code was real. I asked Dr. Rips to look for things that he didn't know I would ask for until I asked. And then he found them in the Bible code, and he had as a control text the Hebrew translation of War and Peace. In the Bible, the information was encoded, and in War and Peace it was not, time after time after time.
Yet in spite of the overwhelming support for the scientific integrity of the initial code research, there are still those scientists who insist it is all just numerological rubbish.
You can compare the reaction of this handful of noisy critics toward Dr. Rips's extraordinary discovery to the reaction of both the church and the scientific community to Galileo. When Galileo said that the earth circled the sun, he was condemned by the scientific establishment and by the religious establishment, because what he had discovered changed the way you must see the world forever.
The criticisms all have to do with the fact that in science, one does not proceed explaining an effect by invoking a miraculous cause.
A major premise of the Bible codes is that the text has remained totally unchanged through the centuries, all the way back to the time of Moses. But in fact, this simply is not the case. The manuscripts from the earlier periods are not the same as manuscripts from the later periods. This totally invalidates the notion of a Bible code based on counting letters. What manuscript do you use? What variants do you use? It's totally ridiculous.
The point is well taken, but once again, the experts disagree.
Bible scholars have long been aware that over the millennia, the Torah has been preserved with an amazingly small number of letter-level variations. Even to this very day, a Torah scroll is copied by hand from its predecessor, written out according to unchanging rules by scribes who undergo an exacting course of training and preparation. To each of them, the following warning has been passed down through the ages. Should you perchance omit or add one single letter from the Torah, you would thereby destroy all the universe.
The text of the Torah has been preserved, not only in pages, lines and words, but even in the exact spelling of every word. In the Ashkenazic text I found 9 words, the spelling of which is not exact to my opinion, but in the Yemenite text preserved the exact spelling of every word without even one exception.
It cannot be said, of course, that the text of the Torah used worldwide today in Jewish practice is the original text. No process carried out by humans can possibly be perfect, but the small number of errors that are known to have crept in over the centuries is striking. The question of the reliability of the text is, however, only one point of contention. In spite of the years of testing and peer review, many prominent mathematicians still believe any words or combinations of words found in the Bible code, no matter how closely aligned, are at best matters of random chance, and at worst, the result of text manipulation.
The computer can look in so many different ways at a text that finding hidden messages in it is almost guaranteed. For example, I looked at the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea and I found in there the hidden message, "Hear all the law of the sea." I looked at the text of Moby Dick and I found the hidden message, "Oceans hold joy." Both of these are extremely unlikely to occur by chance, yet they did occur.
People have claimed that they found similar codes in Moby Dick and War and Peace, that they could find similar codes in any text of one's choice. That is absolute nonsense. They have indeed produced counterfeit codes in War and Peace and in Moby Dick, and they can produce them in virtually any text. They are not the same as the real thing. They are not done a priori. They are done by cheating. Their claim is that since we can cheat on the data and bias the experiment to do whatever we want, therefore Whitstone and Rips could have done the same, and therefore we shall assume that they have done the same. They do not deal at all with the fact that my city's experiment proves that that is not the case. And by the way, to accept their challenge, I would say I would like to see them try to produce an experiment like my city's experiment to confirm their rabbi's experiment that succeeded so well in War and Peace. They haven't done so. They haven't even addressed the city's experiment because it proves that in fact there was no such manipulation. What they have done is very similar to what Whitstone and Rips have done. To the layperson, to the expert, they have nothing in common.
I studied the work of Dr. Rips and his partners, and the outcomes of his experiment expresses his own wishes and desires rather than any real scientific phenomenon.
The quality of a cluster of words you find is really a sign of the cleverness of the person doing the looking and not of any intrinsic character of the document you're looking at. Behind every picture is a statistical analysis that's performed by the computer program Rips and his colleagues have created. It's not just a picture. It's not words that appear together by chance in the Bible. It is accurate, related details of major world events that appear together way beyond mathematical chance. The fake codes that the critics find in Moby Dick or War and Peace or the Manhattan Telephone Directory have no underlying mathematical basis at all. They are just pictures that to laymen might look similar, but are absolutely irrelevant.
Amongst the independent experiments that we've done, we matched the names of the famous rabbis against the names of the books they wrote. We also did an experiment where we matched their names against the years of their birth and death, remembering that the original experiment only used the day and the month. In both cases, we found absolutely no sign of any phenomenon.
There are some cases where critics have done experiments that appear to be designed to fail. They used data which is extremely questionable, data that was left out because of the fact that it was questionable, and they've done an experiment using only the questionable data. Perhaps they simply haven't thought it through thoroughly, or perhaps they specifically designed it to fail. But when one does many experiments of that sort, of an inferior quality, and then claims that he hasn't had a success, I say, why should we be surprised?
The strength of the famous rabbi's experiment is that it seemed to not require an act of faith on the part of the readers, but rather to be a standard, objective, repeatable scientific experiment. Close examination of this evidence shows it to be completely subjective and arbitrary, completely reliant on faith in the honesty of the people who did it, and that disqualifies it as being scientific evidence.
Professor Rips is an honest man. Everybody who meets him, who has talked with him, spent time with him, he comes across as an honest man. It's very hard to conceive that he was part of a process that rigged anything up. And so you have a case where he's basically being accused of a fraudulent, consciously fraudulent experiment. And it's a serious charge. It's the kind of thing that can ruin a professor, to be involved in something that, I mean, professors have to have a point of view for the truth. So you have an inconsistency. You have an honest man, and you have an experiment, and you have a critic. And there's an inconsistency between the experiment, the honesty of the man, and what the critics say.
45 professional mathematicians with PhDs in universities have signed a petition saying that they don't believe in the codes. There's nothing wrong with that. They can express their opinion. These are mathematicians. These are people with PhDs. These are people who have written many papers that have gone through peer review. Why haven't they submitted their view to peer review? Why is it they're signing a petition? I ask you one question. When was the last time a scientific issue was decided by petition?
I also found the data to have too many degrees of freedom. It was already clear from looking at the clusters which they included that what makes this work is what I like to call wiggle room. It's the fact that one has choices, and because of the choices you'll find something. You can keep looking until some choice works.
Let me show you one more experiment done by an independent researcher, Dr. Alex Rottenberg. And the beauty of this experiment is that there is absolutely no wiggle room. This code found in the book of Genesis that deals with the story of Esther allows no room for manipulation. We're taking names of people, the 10 sons of the arch-villain Haman. They all died on one day, the 13th of Adar. Again, names of people and date of death. 10 people, but the spellings are given to us in the book of Esther. No changes, no manipulation possible. We use the spellings exactly as they occur and check if they're next to the date of death. Yud Gimel Ba'adar. And lo and behold, one of these dates of death, incredibly, continues with the word Purim in code, the name of the holiday that is celebrated with the book of Esther. Using this particular date, incredibly small probabilities were arrived at in terms of the proximity of the names of those 10 sons to this particular date of death. There is no room for manipulation. There's no place where we could have changed it in any way. The names are given to us in a thousands of year old document. I think that's the most impressive thing that we have.
Assuming for the moment the code is real, what is its significance? What does the existence of the code mean to the average Christian or Jew? Couldn't some diligent, hard-working scribes have put the code in place over the centuries?
The Torah has been in its present form, according to all authorities, for an absolute minimum of 2,000 years, when it was translated into the Greek under the reign of Ptolemy II in Alexandria, the Septuagint. We can demonstrate, using the laws of quantum mechanics, specifically the uncertainty principle and chaos theory, that it is absolutely impossible within the laws of physics and mathematics as we know it today to know the future in detail as is demonstrated in these codes. Consequently, we come to the scientific conclusion, original experiment done by Whitsom and Rips. At that point, I knew beyond any shadow of a doubt that the code was real. I felt a chill go up my spine.
Encouraged by the results, the study was sent to the prestigious American mathematics journal Statistical Science for peer review and possible publication. Indeed, nothing is published in statistical science until it's been thoroughly reviewed by at least one independent referee, and on occasion two. In this instance, the documentation was submitted to 3
for their scientific peers.
The first experiment was a comprehensive experiment, encompassing a large body of words and expressions that have a connection, like names and nicknames of the great sages and rabbis of Israel, as listed in the encyclopedia along with their dates of birth and dates of death. We measured if indeed there was a tendency for such connections, and the result was that there were connections, and the possibility that this occurred by accident was very minimal.
Harold Gans at the time separate referees. Following its publication, a statement was issued by 5 mathematical scholars, 2 from Harvard University, 1 from Yale University, and 2 from Hebrew University, supporting the findings. Robert Koss, the editor of Statistical Science Journal and a professor at Carnegie Mellon University, is quoted as saying, "Our referees were baffled. Their prior beliefs made them think that the book of Genesis could not possibly contain meaningful references."
In Secrets of the Bible Code Revealed Part 1, we met 3 world-renowned scientists, Dr. Eliyahu Rips, Doran Whitsom, and Yoav Rosenberg. These men, working as a team over a period of 4 years, devised a scientific model for determining whether or not equidistance letter sequence codes were encrypted into the text of the Torah or the Old Testament. The results electrified the religious world and shocked the scientific community. It appeared the codes were real, but could the code researchers defend their findings before?
I'm a senior cryptologist at the National Security Agency in Maryland, heard of the test and the results.
I reproduced the experiment, and lo and behold, I got precisely the results that they had reported. I then went ahead and did a new experiment. Instead of pairing each of the rabbis' names and appellations with their dates of birth and death, I paired them with the places of birth and death, cities, towns, villages, wherever it was they died or were born. And the results I got were even more significant than the